The Big Footy Port Adelaide podcast is proudly sponsored by New Vision.
My team, kinda power. I love the power. I love the power.
Hi and welcome to the Big Footy Port Adelaide podcast. This is a weekly show dedicated to all things Port Adelaide Footy Club. I'm your host, Macca19. Unfortunately, Rick's not able to join us this week, so we're actually speaking to just one other poster today. We're talking to the wonderful Ford Fairlane. How you going, mate?
I'm very well, thank you, Macca.
Foot Falcon is back.
He is indeed.
Well, let's get straight into it. The main topic for discussion this evening is going to be the 1994 season review, but we'll talk about a couple of key things that happened during the week this week. Obviously, the first one is Daniel Flynn's decision to head back home to Ireland due to an ill grandfather and also a bit of homesickness. What were your thoughts on that, Ford?
They're very disappointed, really. Not so much the decision. Obviously, there's those mitigating factors, and I think I've posted on the board that it's a big call for a young fella to come over halfway around the world to play a sport he doesn't really know, and he's given it I think he's given it a really good shot over the summer, done the whole pre-season, really got involved, has been a really valued and popular member of the team, and it's just sad to see him head back before he's had a chance to have a crack at it. I think he showed a lot of ability, and certainly he was up to it with the fitness levels.
Yep.
I think maybe he might have been down on himself a bit that he didn't quite perform to the level he might have thought. But hey, he played one game at AFL level. I think maybe if he'd given himself a chance to play a few games at Sandford level and settled in a bit, that would have helped. But disappointment just in the sense that I think he looks like he really could play the game, and then to lose him before we've really had a chance to look at him, it's just, disappointment is probably the main word that keeps coming back to me, and I guess I'm just hopeful that he'll spend a bit of time home, get his head together, hopefully think, well, maybe I will have another crack at it, and come back, even if it's next year. He's still a very young man, and there's every opportunity for him to head on down this path of AFL football a bit further down the track if that's what he needs.
Yeah, you've echoed my thoughts pretty well there. Certainly disappointment. Not so much in his, obviously he's going home for the right reasons. Ill grandfather, that's fair enough. Homesickness, that's fair enough. I guess just for pure sort of selfish reasons, it's just really disappointing because you could see such a core footballer there. He had all the physical attributes. He was ready to go. His skill level was fantastic for someone that's, barely played a game.
Very clean hands for
absolutely
such a young guy who hasn't played AFL football and I guess would be used to the round ball. He just really good one-hand pick-up.
Such a good kick as well.
Yeah, I think he's obviously put a lot of time and effort into his kicking, and there were certainly those articles about him before he'd come over saying he was really, almost just sleeping with the football and having it taken off him on the plane and things like that, he really did put in the effort to learn the skills with the ball, and it was showing in the way he handled it and in the way he used it.
Do you think maybe, I know you said on the thread on Big Footy that he looked almost perplexed at the end of the Crows game. Do you think maybe we exposed him to AFL level a bit too soon?
Yeah, I think Dos Seminis might have mentioned that in one of his posts, and sort of looking at it there, you think, well, that might be the case. I mean, the only thing, he went straight from an internal trial, which really played at about half pace, and then straight into an AFL game, and even though it's only a trial game, I was at both the games, and you could see from the opening bounce of the Adelaide game that the intensity was just wrapping it up. There's a few steps, I think. I think it probably caught him a bit by surprise. He got caught a couple of times taking guys on, which he probably didn't expect. But, those sort of judgment things certainly as a supporter, you don't worry about them too much, given, where he comes from in terms of his knowledge of the game and understanding of the game. But it could well have been a bit much of a learning experience, if you like, a culture shock possibly to him.
Yeah, very true. Well, we'll move on to the next topic for discussion, which is a little bit of a sad one, which is the Power from Port, an independent Port Adelaide supporter website closing. I think for me it was along with sort of a Collingwood website called From the Outer. It was one of the real sort of first of its kind for independent club run supporter run websites about single clubs. I mean, it sort of led the way for sites like Big Footy and other places like, I guess, Dockerland and Blueseum and stuff like that. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, agree with you there. It was a site, for supporters, run by supporters, had obviously some semi-official links. I'm not quite sure the extent to which the official links were with the club. Certainly, I think Vi and Mark, were heavily involved with the Magpies website as well. So there's clearly some strong connections there. Their connections with organisations like the Outer Army, who do fundraising for the club. And they certainly did a lot for the club, and they provided, I guess, that cyber meeting place for supporters to get together. And clearly, you can see from the posting that went on there. I used to go there and just check it out, see what was happening, and with their posters that have come across the Big Footy, there's a very strong level of camaraderie there, and clearly a lot of the guys that post there know each other, and some spirited discussion as well, as same as we have on our board. And yeah, it was a unique site in the sense that it was there for Port supporters and a very strong Port Adelaide focus. Therefore, I wonder whether it maybe got a bit too big outside of its core business. Started to incorporate a range of other boards, and maybe that increased the workload, and that made it harder. I fully appreciate the huge workload that would have been involved in running that site, and for it to have grown the way it did, could easily wear someone down.
I think for Port supporters, it was pretty well essential reading through the late 90s and early 2000s, where there was really nowhere else to find Port-related articles outside of actually buying a newspaper. So I think it was really revolutionary. It was a great site. It had such a big fan base, and also a big sort of historical content to it. It had lists of every player that's played for Port Adelaide, lots of old historical photos and memories and all that sort of thing. I think it's definitely going to be missed.
Absolutely. There's certainly, I think a few of the members there are probably almost in shock from the rather sudden demise of it, and from what they've posted on Big Footy since they've come across.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's probably left a bit of a hole in a number of people's lives, given the amount of information and the amount of discussion and engagement with the supporters that it provided.
Well, we might as well go on to our main topic for discussion. As I mentioned earlier, it's going to be a season review of the 1994 Premiership. We did a bit of a review of the 1990 season last year. We thought we'd go into another sort of historical season, and we chose 1994. It was such a dramatic year, and one that was really a landmark year for the Port Adelaide Footy Club, both on and off field. And it ended up culminating in both being invited to join the AFL. We won the second licence at the end of the season.
Yep.
And it was also one of, probably, if not the greatest premiership, certainly one of the most unlikely, I think.
One of the most memorable.
Absolutely.
And probably 20 minutes into the first quarter, yes, certainly one of the most unlikely. And in terms of that AFL licence, so I remember at the end of the season, after the grand final, there was a cartoon in the Advertiser, and I'm not sure whether it was an Atchison cartoon or one of the guest cartoonists they used to have, relieving him now and again, and it depicted the bosses of the SANFL and the AFL together in a meeting in AFL House or in some sort of committee room, and outside was this huge magpie casting a shadow across the meeting, and at the door I was there saying to them, excuse me, gentlemen, but there's a Mr. Port Adelaide here to see you. and I think really that grand final is, in terms of if you wanted to pick a single game that stamped our authority on the AFL licence, that was the one.
Definitely, without a doubt. I think what we might do is just have a very brief discussion about 1993 first, because I think that was a premiership that really got away. I think that was the one, since I've been alive, that we really could have and probably should have won. I think we finished 14-6 at the end of the minor round. We thumped Glenelg in the qualifying final. Then we got absolutely hammered by Woodville-West Torrens in the second semi by about 80 points, and we ended up losing the prelim by about 5 goals to Nord. It was a pretty disappointing end to 93, I thought.
Yeah, it did get away. We probably lacked. There was probably something not quite there in terms of the chemistry of the team during the whole year. And I think in early '94 it was looking that way again, and then a few things happened and it clicked. But it was certainly one that was there for the taking. I think, and I'm sort of going from memory here, that we'd beaten the Eagles 3 times during the minor round.
We did. I think we played twice and we beat them both times. So
Okay.
we certainly had the wood on them, and then they went bang in the second semi. I think we only scored 3 or 4 goals for the whole game, and lost by 14 goals.
Yeah, our odd years in the early '90s didn't quite work out for us. And in '91, I think we snuck into the elimination final after losing half our side to some AFL team, and came and lost that convincingly, came 5th. And then, of course, '92, with the Buckley year, we ran rampant over everyone that year and won the premiership. And then '93 never seemed to quite hit 5th gear, got up to 4th a few times. In finals, which is usually our territory, was where we let ourselves down.
Well, on to 1994. We had a large amount of player changes that year. We lost almost half our side, either through retirement or injury or going into the AFL. I might just go through them briefly one by one if you want to give us our thoughts. I guess the main one was losing Greg Phillips, who of course was our champion centre-half back and captain. You know, he'd led us to grand finals and premierships in the past. It's really hard to cover that sort of loss, I think.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's just one of the champions of Port Adelaide and the champions of the game, and a huge number of games and a massive number of premierships to his name, club captain, VFL experience, and just been an awesome player for the sort of those 2 generations of Cale, where the pre-1982 when he played in 1977 and 79 to 81 premierships, and just a dominant force at centre-half back, especially in 80 and 81, and then come back in 87 under Russ Liebert, and then with Jack's return in 88 and back in a centre-half back, and then another 6 years of just magnificent football at centre-half back, just controlling that back line and being the general back there, and with Bruce Abernethy alongside him, and Fiarchi and Delaney, North East, Carter. I mean, you just rattle off the names of Port Adelaide defenders that were just marvellous footballers and such a cohesive unit, and definitely a huge hole to fill.
Definitely. To accentuate that, we also lost Danny Hughes, who also retired.
Yes, another big, strong defender, and I know Cale liked to throw him up forward occasionally as well, just as a big forward presence. So I don't know if Danny was ever a big overhead mark, but just gave you that presence in the forward line.
We also lost our best and fairest winner, which was Troy Bond. He went to Carlton.
Mm-hmm.
Very quick, skillful midfielder, could kick a goal as well.
That's right, yep. Very, very talented player. I think he won junior medals as well, and was always groomed as one of those likely Port Adelaide speedy, skillful midfielders that were always being produced at the club, and especially in the Cale years. And I guess you really started to see the impact of the AFL from the 90s on, where you just kept losing these players at a very young age. I mean, we hung on to them for a long time, for a number of years, but I think the dam had been breached and players were just slipping through the cracks.
We also lost Shea Cockatoo-Collins, who kicked around about 40 goals for the year. He went to Essendon. He was one of our main goal kickers in '93.
Yeah, definitely a very clever, skillful midfielder and goal scorer, and very cheeky sort of player, ready to take the game on at any time, believed in his skills, and could generally produce as well. Just another really super talented, quicksilver, elusive player that, again, we just lost at a very young age.
Another Aboriginal that we lost was Shane Bond. He was another explosive youngster. I think he was only 17 at the time. He went to West Coast.
Yeah, I really like Bondi, really quick. He had almost that Gavin kind of speed. I think he's blisteringly quick. Peter Burgoyne was another one with that really blistering sort of speed that caught your eye, and Bondi tremendously quick and skillful. His brother was probably a bit more flary as a player, and Shane was probably a bit quicker, and just a really nice contrasting at times in that sense pair, but both really good footballers. And just the loss of that young talent really punched a bit of a hole in the side.
Did. Damien Sheehan was another that also went to the AFL. He went to Carlton. He was a bit of a utility toll. Could play centre half forward and probably mostly centre half back from memory.
Yeah, not a really established player, and probably more a smaller forward and back. I don't think he was particularly tall. Not really an established player. I don't think he ever quite established himself at AFL level either.
No.
But certainly a talented player, and would have been a handy utility at SANFL level, and probably a regular league player.
And we also lost 3 others who were either injured or barely played at all through the year. 3 premiership heroes of the past: Adrian Setri, Paul Rosonico and Richard Foster. They didn't really play much footy in 94.
No, and all, as you said, premiership players and great contributors. Fozzie and Rizzo, just great club men and been around for a long time. And whenever you needed a job done, those were the guys you would go to. That list you're reeling off here sort of.
It's a big list, isn't it?
I probably didn't even realise. I hadn't looked back at the list in its entirety, and it's
half our side.
I think we came along in 94 and played as well as we did.
Well, that's it. I mean, obviously there's the outs, but there's also the ins. We got 2 players from AFL level. The main one being Tony Malakellis, who was a midfielder / sort of forward flanker. Very quick, very skillful. Didn't make it at not St Kilda, Sydney or Geelong.
No.
But he came here and he was a fantastic player for a number of years.
Was a terrific pickup for Port, and really contributed to the side over a number of years. Just I think it was probably the old traditional rover in the AFL sense. He wasn't a big guy, but strong and fearless, very quick, very skillful, and really contributed to the club for several years.
I think he missed out on a McGarry medal by 1 vote in 95, I think it was, as well. Scotty Spalding was another one, Earl Spalding's brother.
Yes, very handy pickup, underrated.
Very interesting player. Yeah.
Not well known, I think, when he got here. He sort of, he was Earl Spalding's brother, but he was barely a 6-footer and much more your skillful midfield type. And I remember a funny story about him, that when he got here, the club said, "Oh, we'll get you a job." And that was part of the deal back in those days. And so he came to Port, got a job, and I think it was packing Hessian bags in a warehouse on the port. And it was just horrendous. He would be covered in these fibres and scratching and itchy like crazy. The first thing he'd do is jump in the shower and wash all this crap off. And he finally got a jack of that after a while, and went out and got himself a job as a Coke rep, going from to supermarkets, and
much more civilised.
And much more enjoyed that. Got to meet people and drive around, stay clean, not get covered in scratchy old fibres. So I think it helped his football as well. I don't think he was very happy at one stage there during the year, but
no, he did get dropped sort of around about halfway through the year. I think he played a little bit of reserves footy and then came back and moved to a back flank and was much better. Darren Barch was the other one we got. He played, was on the list at West Coast and also the Adelaide Crows. We got him from West Adelaide.
Yep.
Only really played the first half of the season and sort of disappeared a little bit.
Played a couple of games early and just didn't seem, I don't know whether he had injuries, and just sort of almost disappeared without mention during the year. And I don't recall him the next year. If he was there, he certainly...
No, he certainly wasn't there in 95. No, he left.
Yeah, just sort of faded away, and I don't know what happened there, but looked the goods. I mean, he was a big, strong kid. He was mobile, could get his hands on the ball, was fairly mobile around the ground, but it just didn't work out.
That's it. I guess it was all about the youngsters, though, that came through. I mean, just the football academy we had back in those days, we just constantly churned out these fantastic footballers. And these are some of the names that came through and became regulars in 1994. I guess the main one was probably Darryl Wakelin, who was 19 years old at the time. He filled in the hole at centre half back that Greg Phillips left.
Yep.
He had a pretty good year.
He was pretty solid. I think he got clobbered by Sam Filippo in one of the games, I think in the Anzac Day game early in the year. Got KO'd. Had a really ordinary second semi-final, as I recall. And Jack basically put the acid on him and said, you perform like that again, you won't play any more finals. You won't be playing in a grand final. If we get there, obviously we had to still win the prelim final. And he just responded magnificently. I mean, he won the Jack Odie medal in the end. So he really showed some strength, the character there, and some real football talent and skill. And I think everyone sort of there was almost a bit of an underdog thing with him in that final, and that he lifted his game to that high level was terrific to see, and very important, given the player who he'd replaced at centre half back.
Yep. Well, playing alongside Darryl was Stephen Carter, who was a absolute brute of a footballer, playing on a half-back flank. He'd played one game about 3 years earlier, just out of the blue, as a 17-year-old. Nearly left Port Adelaide, I think. I think he got drafted by Essendon. He chose to stay, and he became a real key player in 1994.
Yeah, Carts was just fantastic. He was
just a typical Port Adelaide player.
Yeah, long hair, Guernsey out, socks down, must have been gone around 6'1" or 2" and 90 odd kilos. Big, powerful guy, very quick for his size. Very good reader of the play, very aggressive player, and Carts wasn't averse to giving you a crack if he thought you needed it.
Oh, absolutely.
And just real, almost cult figure at Port, and got himself on an AFL list with the Power, which was great. Didn't quite work out for him, unfortunately, but I love Carts. He was just such a good halfback. So one of part of that swarming defence, just
relentless,
like a pack of Cape hunting dogs bringing down a gazelle or a gnu. They were just so strong and hard at the ball and tough at their opponents, and he just fitted that mould perfectly.
Yep. Speaking of hunting dogs and cult heroes, Big Darryl Poole, the Big Paulie.
Big Paulie, yeah.
He was a ruck sort of half forward. He made 1994 his own, really. He really stamped himself on that year.
Yeah, really big, powerful guy. I've never been quite convinced of what Pulley's height was. Port kept claiming he was 6'5". I always thought he was about 6'2", but would have gone
He was only about 190 centimetres.
I've seen so many variations. I think when he was playing AFL, Port were claiming he was 195 centimetres, so when we threw him in the ruck, it seemed like a legitimate thing to do. I reckon he looked about 188 to me, but he must have gone about 105 kilos. He was just a big, powerful guy, and he had the big ponytail back then, and would just clobber you. I think it was aggression. Port Adelaide aggression was built on those, Foss Williams initially, but John Cale teams as well, and Paulie certainly fit that mould. He was just such a big, powerful guy, but tremendous mark. I remember shaking his hand one day, and he just about squished my hand into a flipper. It was just he was just so strong.
He really was a brilliant player as well. I mean, he's probably one of the most underrated players of that Port Adelaide era, where everyone talks about his toughness, and he got suspended for a couple of grand finals and
that's right,
all that sort of thing. But he could change a game. He could turn a game in Port Adelaide's favour, almost like no other.
Just tremendous hands, and I think the thing I still remember all these years later is just his quickness of his handball. It was like quicksilver handball from a guy his size, out of packs to guys running by. I mean, not the most elegant of kicks. I guess he had functional kick, we'd call it, but the way he got balls out of packs and out of congestion, and half a dozen guys hanging off him, it didn't matter, and was just superb to watch. He just released players brilliantly, and I think Cale would have loved that big forward playing up the ground.
Yep. There are two other forwards that did sort of debut in 1994. That was Simon Pedler, was a young full forward, and also Troy Olsen, who was a bit of a man-child, sort of a centre half forward flank, also 19 years old.
Yeah, very
Looked
big,
about
strong,
39.
Looked about 30. I think I saw him in one of those country games after he'd retired, and
He
not
put on
long
about 48 kilos, I think.
yeah, and he looked about 50 years old. I was like, who's that old bugger out there? And I was like, that's Troy Olsen.
He would have only been about 23 at the time as well.
Yeah, he wasn't too old. He would have. I mean, it was after he retired, so he might have been 30 because he was fairly young when he walked away from it, as I recall.
Yeah,
But,
he got drafted by Collingwood, I think, somehow, and I think he went over there for a year in '96, and was kind of never heard of again.
yeah, it was a funny one. Troy could really play a very quick, very strong, good overhead. A bit of an enigma.
Definitely an enigma.
And
Without a doubt.
certainly, he was. He went on to play in the Premiership side as well. So, as I think he just had to pull on a Port Guernsey to do that during that Cahill era.
Pretty much. There were three or maybe two young midfielders as well. We'll touch on Andrew McLeod after because he's worth a chat on his own. But two others in Michael Gaffney and Troy Hull who came in and played some pretty decent footy. Troy Hull's a bit of a disappointing story in that he did his collarbone, I think it was, in the prelim.
Yeah.
And was really starting to play some great footy as a midfielder.
Yeah, I think he was one of those guys that just needed to pick up the pace of the game a bit early on, and once he did, he was a very skillful player. I don't think he was particularly quick, as I recall, but a good size.
And of course, a young 17-year-old debuted midway through the year by the name of Andrew McLeod, and he ended up having just one of the most great AFL careers you could possibly think of.
Just astonishing. I think when you first saw him, you knew he was something special. I mean, he was a bit of a chunky kid, but very quick, just great instinct for the game, read it beautifully, dangerous around goals. I think as a half-back in those Premiership years at Adelaide, almost impassable. You rarely saw a guy who just read the game about 3 moves ahead of everyone else like he did. He would just, his ability to intercept opposition attacks and cause a turnover just simply from his own reading of the game and his brilliance was unparalleled. And I think as a young guy sitting up in the forward line, lurking around half forward, also very dangerous and able to kick goals, carry the ball, happy to take the game on.
I guess we'll have a little bit of a quick chat about Woodville-West Torrens. They merged in 1991 after the Crows joined the AFL. They won the flag in 1993. They won two night flags, in 93 and 94. And they were one of those real sort of tough, arrogant, conceited sort of SANFL teams that knew they were good and lived up to it. They were full of pre and post AFL players. What were your thoughts on them back then?
They were just a really strong team. You could see Bruce Winter as their coach, had taken over from Barney, and would really modelled them on Port Adelaide, I thought. I mean, he filled the key positions, the really big, strong guys. They had a lot of pace and skill around the ground, a lot of size and strength. They'd clearly worked hard on the Port Adelaide model of big, strong, aggressive type players, and certainly when we played them, they were tough games because they didn't back down. You know, we'd try a bit of rough stuff on them and they'd give it straight back, and they were a very strong side, very strong across the ground, good players in a lot of positions, strong ruck, strong key positions, quick rovers, skillful flankers and wingmen. Very good side, and I think basically they were set up as for the dynasty. I think there was always certainly among their supporters the talk was of the dynasty, and I know coming into that grand final that their supporters thought, Port will put up a bit of a fight for a while and then we'll pull away. Won't be a big loss for them, probably only 40, 50 points. That was the sort of the way they were thinking. And certainly, they were arrogant.
Well, Well, they had, just in their grand final 20, they had 15 players that had an AFL career either before or after that match. And there was probably 3 or 4 others. I think Lawrence Shackey and Romano Negri didn't play in the grand final, but they had AFL experience as well. So they were chock full of talent. On every line, they had big, talented players.
Absolutely. And Jason Spear probably should have had an AFL career. Somebody ruined that for him.
No doubt we'll touch on that a little bit later on.
Yes, I'm sure.
Moving on to us, Port Adelaide, of course, I guess we'll just briefly touch on this. I mean, the first half of the year we were kind of not really into it. I think we were 5 and 6 at the halfway mark of the season. We were out of the 5. There was one match we were 9-0 up against West and lost by a point.
Yeah,
I think it was on a Friday night at Footy Park, and Scotty Simister took a hanger in the goal square on the siren and kicked the winning goal after the siren or something.
Yeah, I was at that game. It was horrible.
Horrible.
You had that.
Yeah, absolutely disgraceful.
It was reasonably early. I think it was around 6 or 7, and it was sort of in a loss. It was probably our third loss in about 4 weeks. So we opened the season with a couple of big wins over South Adelaide and Norwood. Lost a couple, won one, and then lost that one to Westies, and really could have derailed the season. But around there, I guess. But yeah, it was a terrible result, and obviously we'd lost by 11 goals to Woodville-West Torrens a bit earlier than that. About round 4, they'd smashed us. I think one of the things that was happening with us then, I think Scotty Hodges came back as a full-time full forward at Port, and we were playing Hodges and Tyler as a 2-pronged attack, and they were quite effective. I think by about round 7 or 8, they'd kicked over 50 goals between them.
Yeah.
But it still wasn't quite gelling.
Yeah.
I think there was a bit of, which one do you go to? Because they're both full forwards, they led to similar places, and while they worked it out pretty well between them, it was almost a bit like for Scotty coming back from Adelaide and having to do that same thing with Muldra. I'm just going back in time here and off topic, I know, but why Graham Corns took Scott Hodges off in that 93 prelim final when they had Essendon scored doubled at half-time and were all but in the grand final.
Well, we've just got to thank him for that, probably.
And it was one of the key factor for them losing that game. And for Scott saying, well, I've had enough, I'm going to go back and play Sandford now. I just want to quickly jump back. Pre-season, I've just reminded me, was that we played Essendon in a trial game.
We did.
It was part of Port Adelaide's push to put their name up in front of the AFL licence deciders, and we would be playing the next year. We played the Dockers for the Dock Lanes Trophy in a pre-season game, and we played Essendon, who were the defending premiers, and I think Essendon sent over about 4 premiership players. I mean, if it was the baby Bombers that won in 93, it was the embryo Bombers that played us in this trial game. And we've absolutely destroyed them. I think we won by 75 points. Yeah. Mark Tyler kicked 5 goals, and Meady kicked a couple, and I think Olsen kicked 3. Damien Angove and Mark Williams and Tony Malakalis were all on the best players. But I also remember that game where we were all looking forward to watching Gavin Wanganeen play. And Gavin basically said, no, I can't play against Port Adelaide. And he pulled out on the day of the game. He told Sheedy, no, I won't play against them.
I guess the turning point was a match against Glenelg. At Glenelg Oval, we won by a small margin of 132 points. It was the debut of Andrew McLeod. He kicked 3 goals and had about 20 touches that day. There was another short Aboriginal player called Trevor May who kicked 4 goals that day as well.
Mm-hmm. And a reasonably well-known key forward wearing number 11 kicked 8.
He did.
To bring up his 47th goal for the year at that point.
That was
about round 13, did you say?
Yeah, it would have been about that. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, there were 10 matches for the rest of the year. We went 9 wins and 1 loss for the rest of the minor round. So it really did kick-start our year. The only loss we had was to Woodville-West Torrens.
Yeah, the very next week.
Yes,
we lost by 7 goals to them, and I was at that game sitting in the grandstand at Woodville Oval. And I thought after that game, that was the last time they would beat us that year. Actually, even though we lost it fairly comfortably, they had a 10-goal quarter where I think just everything went right. Umpiring decisions, bounce of the ball. It was really the difference between the two teams.
Yep.
of course, unsurprisingly, I was wrong because they did beat us again that year, but not when it mattered.
No.
So I'm going to claim that.
That's it.
But certainly from at that point, from that Glenelg game on, I think in the next, 13 rounds, Scotty Hodges has booted
6 or more goals in 7 of the last 10 minor round matches.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think in round 23, he brought up the ton.
Yep.
With the 10 goals against Glenelg again, to get to 107, and kicked another 7 in round 24 when we beat Woodville-West Torrens by 82 points at Alberton.
Smashed them.
Absolutely. It was
smashed them.
I think a result no one really expected. I think we'd won about 9 in a row before that game, something like that. We'd beaten Norwood at Norwood, which was always a good omen for us for premierships. You can beat Norwood at Norwood, we were always travelling well. And we ran into that Woodville-West Torrens game and really with a head of steam. We'd beaten Glenelg by, I think, 19 points a week before. Scotty had kicked 10 and brought up the ton. And just destroyed them in that game. I think there was a bit of talk like Winter had resting a few players because he knew they were having the week off, and
well, that's it.
They had top spots sewn up and they had a few sore bodies, so he's going to give them a bit of extra rest.
Well, this is why I thought they were arrogant, because Winter after that game came out and said, well, then we're never going to lose like that again because A, finals aren't played at Alberton Oval, and B, we can't play that bad ever again. So don't expect that to happen.
No, that's not going to happen again. But and I think just out of mention of that year, Gary McIntosh won the McGarry medal that year with 22 votes.
He did. A miracle that he wasn't suspended at some point during the year.
Yes, Gary managed not to punch anyone with the umpire looking. Won the McGarry medal. Tony Malakellis polled 12 votes. He led the board for Port Adelaide.
Yep.
And really showed, I think, his class during that year. That the umpires, his first season, the umpires usually take a while to work out who you are. He finished 10 behind McIntosh, who had 22, but still, he led Port Adelaide's voting.
I think he was best on ground in round 1 and got the 3 votes. So he started the year with a bang, I think.
They did notice him then from the outset.
Well, we'll jump in and talk about the finals, because it was quite an interesting final series. We played Central District in the qualifying final. The day before, North Melbourne, I can't remember who they played, I think it was Hawthorn. They had the very first drawn final that would go into extra time at AFL level. Then the very next day, the same thing happened for the first time at SANFL level with the qualifying final going into extra time.
It's one of those weird coincidences in football, isn't it? That something like that would happen. No, and I guess we were playing Central Districts in the qualifying final, and I think at one stage it looked like we had that game pretty much won, and then suddenly Central's very late in the game.
They kicked 5 goals in the last 10 minutes.
Kicked 5 goals, that's right. It took a 7-point lead with about, less than a minute to play.
And then Scotty kicked one.
Scotty kicked one. I think Daisy Borlase kicked a point.
It levelled the scores with about 5 seconds left, I think it was.
And then I think Scotty kicked a couple in time on, didn't he? That sealed the game.
They did, yeah.
Yeah, well, the guy they probably disliked the most as well because he lived in Central Zone and stood out of football. They forced him to stand out of football, so he'd go to Port Adelaide, which is also always really weird because his father played some footy for Port, not only a few games, but these days, I mean, father-son rule in Sandford, I think one league game will get you in.
Yep.
But back then, clearly the rules were different because he was forced out of football by Central's to qualify for Port Adelaide, and that was only after he'd played under 15 Sandboy Cup and played some really good footy for Port, and then Central's realised that he was in their zone, and then told him, no, you've got to come and play for us, and that was basically all over my dead body. I'm playing for Port Adelaide. And they said, well, then we're not going to clear you. And so he had to go that old route of standing out of league football to get a clearance to the club of his choice. And there was never any love lost between Centrals and Hodges, certainly. And I think he might have got a little bit of extra enjoyment out of being the guy that sank them in that final.
Absolutely. The next week we played Woodville-West Torrens. We got smashed by 73 points. Sammy Philippou was best on ground, gave Daryl Wakeland an absolute pasting.
Yep. I think Wake's got the message from Jack then. Yeah. You better do something better than this next game. I'll give you one more game or you're out. And it was terrible. I honestly can't even remember it anymore. Blocked it out of my memory. All I remember is we got hammered. It was terrible.
From memory, it was pretty wet. I always remember someone was having a go at Darren Smith behind me, a Port supporter, and I went nuts at them because I thought, well, this is just ridiculous. Darren's such a hero, such a good player, and back then, he was always getting abused by all and sundry just about, and it was just so unwarranted.
Yeah, that's right. I remember the jokes about Darren Smith in his handbag, and I would tell people, "Hey mate, you have a look in that handbag and see how many premiership medallions there are."
Exactly.
He was, and Cale loved him. Cale thought...
With good reason. He was a fantastic
really tough player. Cale thought he was tough. He said, I didn't run in and bowl blokes over and stuff, but he said, you want someone to back into a pack who'll stand under a hospital wall. Darren Smith was a guy. Never ever showed any fear, would get cleaned up, would get hit, didn't care, he went at the footy. He didn't smack guys around like Pulley did, but he was
he didn't have to.
Very brave,
tough in his own way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Super quick, and his ability to take a mark and turn on a dime and dish off a handball, almost in the one action was just unparalleled. Yeah. I think he's probably... I've watched a lot of SANFL footy and AFL footy in my time, but I think he's probably the most underrated player in the SANFL history, I think. Which is stupid when you're thinking about someone that's played 350 games and won 8 premierships.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just ridiculous that, even now you sort of people mention and you see them roll their eyes and you think, what's the guy have to do? Yeah. It was almost that trademark. He was going up to the wing, mark the ball, turn on the spot, run past the lumbering centre half back who was working his way back round in a big circle through the third row of the grandstand at Footy Park to get around, and he was gone. He was down the ground. He was either kick. It was a beautiful kick for goal. He was either banging it through or hitting someone on the chest with a pass. Just a super footballer. Huge fan of Darren Smith. Always have been.
We played Central Districts again in the prelim. We won by 90 points.
Yeah, absolutely smashed them.
Big Troy Olsen and Simon Pelly kicked 9 goals between them.
That's right. Scotty just a lazy 3. Yep. And we kicked in the last quarter. We kicked 10 goals 6 to 1 goal 2, which was a bit of an omen of what was to come. It wasn't. It was probably 20 something points at 3/4 time, and blew out to 90 because of that last quarter. Yeah. And it was just a huge result. In the end, and I think the fitness of the team and Cale's ability and Arnfield with him at the time to prepare a team for finals really started to show in those games and with what followed the next week.
Yeah. As mentioned earlier, Troy Hull dislocated a shoulder or did his collarbone. He missed the grand final. And of course, Big Paulie, don't know what went through his head, but in front of the umpire, he gave Simon Lewis, I think it was, a massive headbutt.
Well, actually,
clobbered himself.
What happened there was he wasn't actually pinged at the ground. Well, Lewis was reported for striking him, and then they watched the video, and then on the Monday, the SANFL video reviewers laid the headbutting charge against Darryl Poole. Centrals had sort of made some noises. There was provocation. There was contact made to Lewis' head before he hit Paul. And funnily enough, the guy who brought the charges on behalf of the Sandford was Lee Wicker. And Paulie was actually...
Good old Lee
we went through the weekend as supporters thinking, Lewis, bad luck for you. And then we find out Monday, and then it just went straight up to the tribunal. And he's copped, was it 5 games?
Yeah, it was about...
Lewis got a couple for punching him and Paulie got 5 or 6 for the headbutt. Yeah. It was... it's
funny, Lee Weaker was the one that suspended Russell Johnson as well.
Just keeps popping
Just
up,
the
doesn't
gift
it?
that keeps on giving. Lee Wicker.
That name. It's 20 years ago.
Oh,
20 years ago, he was still there doing stuff to us, and I'm sure for
it's like
many
a
years
venereal
before.
disease.
He's like a character out of an H.P. Lovecraft novel that he seems to transcend time and dimension to hunt us down and try and damage us.
Oh, God. Well, Stephen Williams and Roger Delaney came back in for those two players. They missed the prelim. I think both of them had hamstring injuries from memory. And a bit of a quirk in the draw meant that Woodville-West Torrens had only actually played 3 games in the prior 36 days leading up to the grand final.
Right. So yeah, you're right. We came to that grand final. They'd not played a lot of footy, but it didn't seem to affect them too much. They certainly came out in that first quarter and were all over us like a cheap suit.
Absolutely. I mean, I think they were the shortest price favourite in grand final history. They were pretty well unbackable given the history between the two clubs that year. And you're right, they did.
Yeah.
They just came and I'm not even sure what happened, but we were just absolutely thrashed in the first 25 minutes of that quarter.
Yeah, they were just all over
6
us.
goals 5 to 0 goals 3. It was 25 minutes into the first quarter.
And then Timmy Ginniver somehow managed to start a fight and get a free kick.
He did. I think for me, the turning point almost of the game was Brett Chalmers started in the ruck and he was absolutely pantsed early, which is quite unlike him. He got dragged. And Darren Mead, he came off the bench and really gave us a big spark to finish that quarter. It was actually only his second game in 4 months, Meady. He came in for the prelim, I think, and played the grand final as well. And he got the ball moving in Port's direction a couple of times, and it led to the ball being in that forward pocket when Timmy clobbered a Freeborn, I think it was, and won a free kick. And then I think he got a free kick in the ruck and banged it forward for Scotty, who took a one-hander and kicked a goal straight after that as well.
That's right, and suddenly it's less than, I think it was less than 24 points. The difference at quarter time was just under 4 goals, and you sort of thought, well, we're back in it. You know, it's only quarter time of a grand final.
22 points it was at quarter time.
Yeah, 2-4 to 6-2, I believe, and right back in the game. And I think from that point on, I think Port really started to assert themselves. I think on the scoreboard, we just weren't doing it. Second quarter, I think it was 2-2 to 2-3 in their favour. Yep. So 23
points. Pretty well
at
dead heat, really. The second quarter.
It was, but I think even John Cale said after the game, he thought in that second quarter, he thought we took control of the game. I've always likened it to two of those big mountain goats that butt heads, and they were just, and that's what Port and the Eagles were doing for a quarter and a half, just cracking heads together. Yep. But I think their knees buckled.
It was a pretty crappy day as well. It was
very wet. I think the sun
windy
came up, but early on it was wet and it was windy. It was I vaguely recall banners falling apart before. I think Port's banner just tore apart and Port didn't bother running through it. It was just sticky tape by the time they got to it, and the Eagles came out first and just got through theirs. And certainly at half time we thought, well, it's still only 23 points and we seem to be on top, but could we convert that into something meaningful? I think too, also worth mentioning, by this time Mark Tyler was playing in defence.
Yes.
He'd been,
moved back to a back
Scotty went on his goal scoring rampage from the middle of the year to go from 30 goals to 100 in about 8 rounds. He
pretty well swapped Troy Olsen and Mark Tyler's roles, I think.
Yeah, Tyler's sort of slipped into defence and was very good back there. And I think he missed out in '93. I think obviously didn't play in. In '92. I think he missed out in the grand final. Had a couple of injuries that just were enough to keep him out of the side and missed out the premiership there. Yep. So. And in '92 had kicked a lot of goals during the season.
'96, I think it was, or '98. Yeah, he was very close to the 100, then broke his hand. I think it was
more than I recall there. But I think Scotty sort of came, was cut loose of the Crows because they weren't in the finals, and so he was back at Port, and Cale basically went with Hodges as a key forward in '92, and of course, as always, Scotty didn't let him down. And Tyles probably just had a few niggling injuries, and so it was I remember Tyles after the game being so emotional because he played in that grand final, and he played really well. I mean, he played, I think, on Scotty Morfitt in that
Yeah, I think he moved. He started on Taylor and then moved to Morfitt after quarter time, I think, because Morfitt had kicked, I think, 3 goals in that first quarter.
Yeah,
really tore the game open.
And Tolles shut him down. I think Morfitt was barely sided. He might have kicked their goal in the last quarter, but he was unsided. So a really great day for Tolles too. Really deserved that.
Pretty unlucky for someone that played. I think it was around about 160 games of SANFL footy for Port Adelaide. He only played in the one grand final.
Yeah.
And that was it. And he pretty much became a regular throughout sort of 87, 88 when our era of dominance really started. So he was very unlucky.
He's one of those guys that it just didn't quite fall his way like it did to some others. Players who were just plucked out of reserves and got a game, or Fozzie playing in a premiership side where Jack had just basically pulled him out of the reserves and said, I need a player I can trust in a final. You're it. Yep. Win a premiership. I remember Tony Hannon, going way back, being pulled out of country footy by Cale in 1980 to replace Tony Giles, and plays in a premiership. He was playing in Port Pirie or something for the year because he was a teacher and got shifted into a country school. And then you've got the other side of someone like Mark Tyler, who's, as you said, played all those games and plays in one grand final.
That's it.
But one of the ones he'll never, ever forget.
Definitely. If you're going to play in one, that's probably the one you wanted to play in, I think.
That was the one to be in. So we came out in the third quarter. I think really we took control in the third quarter.
The sun came out.
Yep, sun came out. Port came out to play. Eagles had kicked 1 goal, 2 in that third quarter. And Port up to almost a siren at 3/4 time, kicked 1 goal, 7.
Yep.
They just missed opportunity after, I think, 3 or 4.
Really gettable goals.
Real gimme goals for, even guys like Rowan Smith were missing. And then right on the 3/4 time siren, Stephen Williams kicked our second goal for the quarter.
Yep.
I think we were 12 points down at 3/4 time. And everyone's really tense because this game's just so close by then. But everyone's thinking, well, Port Adelaide dominated the quarter, couldn't convert. Did they really have it? Was there another shot left in the breach? Could they keep it going? And
I guess that was the feeling at the ground. I remember the feeling at the ground was sort of, well, has Port sort of burnt all their petrol tickets? Because they've had a pretty tough month. Eagles have barely played a game. They're fresh as a daisy. But in the end, I think that actually worked against them.
Well, I think they couldn't get their hands on the ball in the end, so it's a bit hard to tell. If they could have actually won the footy, maybe they would have run with it, I don't know. But I guess going back to that prelim final where we kicked 10-6 to 1-2 in the last quarter, you look at this game, we kicked 9 goals, 3 to 1 goal 2. It was just incredible. Extraordinary. I mean, you just couldn't believe it. Within a couple of minutes, the lead was gone. We were basically on level pegging, and we just kept banging him through. I mean, Scotty Hodges played the quarter century.
Oh, absolutely. Scotty had only 4 disposals and 1 goal to 3/4 time. I think it's worth mentioning this because Jason Sphere, he had killed him all year, basically.
Yeah.
Especially in the second semi-final, I think Scotty only had about 2 or 3 kicks. Here we are again in the grand final, and Spears thrashed him again. And the last quarter, I mean, where do you pull that from? He kicked 5 goals. Jason Spear, I think we've spoken about it on the podcast before, but Spear was probably the best fullback, or definitely the best fullback outside of the AFL system at that point, who was of a draftable age. He was only about 22 or 23 at the time. So many people thought he was ready to go up to the next level, and it never happened after that game. It killed his career.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, even at SANFL level, I think he sort of was never the same.
Plodded around for a couple of years, and that was it.
Didn't play for a long time after. I know he was a police officer, and I think probably shift work certainly doesn't help you with football training and playing. And while some players have obviously combined those careers, I think he probably then might have started to focus more on his job as well. But had he got the call up at the AFL level, certainly the story went that he was expecting to be drafted. I think a couple of clubs had promised him they would draft him. Come the draft, his name never got called out. He actually called one of those clubs up and said, "Well, what happened? What happened? You calling out my name on draft day?" And their response was, "Well, what happened to you in the last quarter of the grand final?" I mean, it really did.
That is the ultimate troll.
Yeah,
What
it
a
is,
great troll. That's brilliant.
Must have been a Victorian club because
Definitely.
they're very cruel, very cruel.
Very cool.
But it was just. I mean, Scotty took
It's
marks. I
relentless.
mean, that that run down tackle on Speary where he's basically caught him, dragged him down, and Speary's just lost the ball. The umpies the whistle, the other big theatrical holding
You
the
could
ball. He
see
might
his
have actually
heart
done him
break
for a
at that
throw, I
moment.
think.
You could see his
And
heart
he's banged
tear in two when that happened.
it was just amazing, and I just at the ground. I watched that. You watch that last quarter now and again on YouTube, or if you've got it on DVD, and it still sends shivers down your spine and makes the hairs on your arm stand on end. It's
7
the
goals.
noise of the crowd, and the commentators were just blown away by it. I think they were just astonished by what Port Adelaide did, and I think David McKay was one of the commentators, and I think he was quite enjoying the way the Eagles had been travelling for about a year. But even he had nothing but respect for Port for what they did. But that last quarter was just one of the most amazing quarters of football you'll see. To do that in any game, it can happen. But in a grand final against a team that was setting itself up as a dynasty that had smashed us by 60 points and 40 points during the year, destroyed us by 73 2 weeks earlier, it was just extraordinary. You just didn't expect it. At three-quarter time, we thought we're only a couple of goals down. We might be able to pinch this, and you didn't think you'd just come out and just steamroll them.
Absolutely thrashed them. 7 goals won in 14 minutes to start the quarter we kicked. I mean, it's unheard of.
I remember once a guy I used to work with told me about when he was at Duntroon, and one of his fellow cadets machine gunned a cow with an M60. He got drummed out, obviously, for that. Yep. And looking back, I guess that if you could imagine that visually, that was sort of what was happening to the Eagles. They were just exploding in front of you. It was like, Robocop or something. And they were in pieces. Yep. It was just frightening.
It's definitely one of the most dramatic grand final quarters in history.
Yeah.
At any level you could think of.
Yeah, I mean, to be, the last quarter of a game that's on the edge, the team's coming from behind is the one that explodes, and the one that hasn't had any rest through the finals. I mean, it was just completely against all likelihood, and the antithesis of what you expected would happen in a game of football.
Now, the Jack Odie medalist, Darryl Wakelin. He absolutely killed Filippo. Someone who smashed him 2 weeks earlier in the second semi. As we said, Jack Cale pretty much put his spot in the finals on the line, and he kept Filippo to just 1 mark and 3 kicks for the game. And this is a guy that was probably, from memory, he was the centre half forward in the SANFL Team of the Year that year. He went to the AFL, I think in '95, and played for Footscray for a couple of games. And he just absolutely pantsed him. It was one of the big grand final drubbings, I think.
And I'd have to say too that Filippo didn't have a great reputation in big games. I think I don't think he'd had a very good final series the year before. He'd been particularly dominant. I think in state games too, he hadn't really done a lot. And so I think he had a few demons as well coming into that game that really had been overlooked because of just the form of the whole team. And he certainly didn't conquer his demons, whereas Wakelin sent his, spiralling out of the ground. I mean, the other good players, I don't think North East was probably second best. He just had a huge game. He just smashed everyone he played on. Stephen Williams, as you said, came back from injury and just played a superb game. Just won the ball, kicked an important goal. Scotty Spalding was superb all day, just running off half back, pushing up into the midfield, got plenty of the footy. Delaney, who'd come back from injury again, just controlled the fence and was superb.
Really beat
Scotty Hodges.
Stuart Nicol and Andrew Taylor. He played on for most of the day, and they had no real influence on the game at all.
We used to call Andrew Taylor showbags because of the big blonde hair and some pretty extravagant gestures about the way he played. And to shut those guys down, I mean, Nicol had kicked 100 goals and was a really good full forward, and just just destroyed him. Hodges, of course, just in the end, for one extraordinary quarter of football, leapt into the best players, and Timmy Geneva was fantastic all day.
Geneva
really
was
hard
probably
out.
my next in line for the Jack
Yeah.
Odie medal, I thought. He was just such a great captain's performance. Just
Timmy
really
got
got us
such
back
great
into it.
Port Adelaide spirit, super Port Adelaide spirit, and just never ever gave up. I mean, Kenny Hinkley would love Tim Geneva. Just one of the most dedicated, professional, spirited Port Adelaide players you'll ever see. I think kicked a couple of goals as well. He finished with 2. McLeod kicked 2. Williams kicked 2. I think Badler kicked 1. And Scotty, of course, kicked 6 out of the 15.
Yep. I think there's you touched on Paul Northeast. Something interesting happened at the aftermatch back at Alberton, because he had a pretty little bit of a dirty year. I think he played a lot of reserves footy that year. There was some articles in the paper which were sort of questioning his output and where he sort of sat with Port Adelaide at that time, and he'd come in and had a really fantastic final series. And as you do after the grand finals back then, I think we had Barry Curtin on the stage, and he's going through the players one by one, and Paul Northeast comes out and he says, everyone sort of questioned my attitude towards my football. Well, what do you bloody well think of this? And he threw his premiership medal into the crowd, and just an enigma of a person, Paul Northeast. Just
extraordinary guy.
Just a strange fella.
I sort of knew him a little bit, spending time down at the club, and after the '92 grand final where we beat Glenelg, going around to the Sunday after, I think that was the Monday, because it used to be the holiday Monday, and Norther would always be there on the Monday. One of the league players that was always there and had enjoyed himself all night, and catching up with him, and he'd be handing out the Thomas Seymour Hill trophy full of champagne to supporters, and I remember him handing me the cup and saying, "Have a drink, mate, have a drink." And I sort of had a drink of champagne from the Thomas Seymour Hill cup. It was very nice, a very, very fine moment, that one a couple of years before. And I remember talking to him after the game, and he was playing on Clayton Lamb, I think, in that game, and he was, "Oh yeah, mate, I was ready to come. I was really pumped." And he said, I had to feed my dog before I went, I gave him to eat, don't you? And I went, "What'd you give him to eat?" "I gave him lamb. I gave him lamb to eat because I was going to eat some lamb that day." And he was memorable at the 1989 grand final. I was at the post-match at the brewery chimney when we did the unveiling, and Norther never ever said a word up to that point in time. You'd never heard him speak, and I think the combined speeches of Paul Northeast fit on the back of a postage stamp at that point in his life. And he's come out, and North had been up there, and he'd had, I think it was Darryl Hart back then, was it? Mickey Noon. "Oh, we're really sorry. We've let the SA football public down and kicked 1 goal." And North has gone up there, and everyone's been humble and generous, and "Oh, yeah, bad luck, mate," and all of that. And he goes up there and he goes, "Oh, I've listened to Darryl and Mickey come up here, and he's like John Belushi in Animal House, is how I remember it." And I'm probably exaggerating there for it. "Oh, we're really sorry. We didn't mean to let you down. Well, guys, you know what? I'm really sorry too. You know why I'm sorry? Because we let you kick a goal." And everyone's just burst out laughing. And Dale Hart like he was going to cry. It was Noonan just, this guy's out of control. And then I remember at the end, they'd give the players these frisbees to throw to the supporters, and I swear Northey was trying to ping Noonan and Hart in the head with his. He was a funny guy. I mean, I loved him. He was just, you had to love Norther.
Such a great footballer as well.
Bit of an oddball maybe, but just a great guy. I think if Port Adelaide was Animal House, he was John Belushi.
Now, we've mentioned the so-called Woodville-West Torrens dynasty, which was over pretty much before it began. They finished second bottom in 1995, the year after.
They followed closely after that.
They lost a number of players. Yeah. They lost about 4 or 5 players to AFL level. I think Filippo, Camporelli, Zilla, Kennedy and Sheldrick, I think, left for the AFL. And they just couldn't back it up at all. And mind you, our dynasty, I think we won 4 more premierships from 5 grand finals after that.
That's right. And entered the AFL.
That's it. So you can stick your,
And,
stick your dynasty up your ass, basically.
Dynasty didn't last very long. It was the 12-month dynasty. It sort of started when they beat Norwood, and it ended when we beat them.
Absolutely.
And it was over very quickly. And I mean, their level of ambition was shown by the fact that they tried to get in the AFL in a cartel of 5 other clubs and have no identity at all. So. Whereas, Port Adelaide, on the other hand, always stood on their own, done things their own way, and entered the AFL as a single club entity.
That's it. We did win, of course, we mentioned a little bit earlier, we won the licence for the second AFL club in South Australia. Such a great moment, such a great achievement. We finally finished our goal of getting into the highest level in the country.
The place where we belong, the stage we were destined to be on, from the Williams era through the Cale eras, it was always heading towards that one point of light, and we got there.
That's it. Of course, 10 years later, we won our first AFL premiership. Another 10
That's
years.
right.
Do you see where I'm going with this? Another 10 years. There's something about 4 in the year number, I think.
There's something going on there. You might need to spell it out for me. I don't always catch on straight away.
Well, let's hope this year's another successful year. I think we've done 1994 justice, personally.
We've given it a good run. I think you're right there. I think there's not much more you can say about that year. I think the one thing about that year is that I can barely remember a game against any other side other than the Eagles. And I think that was always a thing for Port Adelaide. They were the team we had to beat, and we knew they were the team we had to beat to climb the mountain that year.
That's it.
And they knocked us over a few times during the year, but we got them when it mattered, like we always do.
Outside of the finals, I think the only other game that I remember, which wasn't against the Eagles, would have been that Glenelg Oval game where we thumped them by 25 goals. Just because of the McLeod debut, the fact Scotty went nuts. We were playing against Mark Williams as coach of Glenelg.
Yeah.
And we just thrashed them, absolutely thrashed them. Well, I think we've done well.
I think we've done well, and I've certainly enjoyed having a reminisce about a wonderful Port Adelaide Premiership year.
That's it. Great to have you back on, buddy.
Great, thank you for inviting me.
No doubt to have you on again in the future.
That would be great. Thank you again.
Go the Power.
Absolutely.
A couple of weeks ago, he gets it to Rowan Smith. Awkward looking kick. If they can get one here, it'll make a world of difference. Here's Scotty. Listen to the roar. Well, we talked about the players required to lift. One of them was Stephen Williams, who had 9 kicks and 3 handballs during the third quarter. The other one emerging with a mark in the opening seconds of this final term, Scotty Hodges. 1 goal too. He has had a couple of opportunities to kick goals. Well, 514 career goals. This is one of his most important kicks ever. That goal umpire, I can tell you, hasn't moved a muscle. Scotty's got his second. The grand final's alive. 6 points in it. 9-7 plays 7-13. Fair question. Fair call. Darren Smith locks arms. Geneva comes charging through. Magnificent game from Timmy. 14-4 at the moment. Malak Tallis. He can lift the side. 55 metres out. Here's a chance for Hodges. Can he take it again? He has! Thank you very much. This is almost as if the crowd has injected him with adrenaline and pumped him up, Scotty Hodges, because something's happened. There's been a metamorphosis. Spear has jumped over the top of him, outran him, outbumped him and outbustled him. Scotty Hodges a moment or two ago led out and beat Spear to the ball. Scott Hodges is a champion. McGarry medalist, dual Ken Farmer medalist. And I talked about one of his most important kicks ever a moment ago. He has too. This is the most important kick, and he's got it. Port Adelaide are back. The scores are tied away in the grand final. 5.5 minutes in. What a beauty. Shieldridge there. Chapman's caught. Rowan Williams. Smith. That's his name. Hodges. He's got it. He's put it down. No free kick. Play on to the goal. On Scully. All right, Rock. We'll just give you a little... Took his eyes off the footy. Just give you a Valium, Rock. Oh, it's a mark. He just eats those normally. Well, you can see what it's doing up here in the commentary box and what's it doing to the crowd and the players. Smith. Chance! Who's got it? Pepper, is it? Hodges. McLeod. Goal of Maggie! The lead. He's back. Well, McLeod kicked it off the ground. Pedler set it up, though, by pushing it forward. It
we talk about team there. D. Smith, Hodges was touched. Play on, said the umpire. Was flicked forward.
In a row is looking to be stolen from beneath his very eyes. Well done by Piacci. Snared it, just played the zone defence, sat back and did it well. Ginnivan, get it over the top, son. He does. Borlase has the runner on the inside. It's Wakeland. Good looking drop punt. Where's Hodges? Here's the danger man at the moment. He's got it. Right on cue. Scotty's come into the game and he's burst it open.
Ominous signs for the Eagles. Hodges with sheer strength just elbowed Spear out of the contest. Stood his ground and took a chest mark. He has 3 goals, 2 already. Port Adelaide have the upper hand at the moment. They've fought back from nowhere.
Neville Roberts questioned the Port Adelaide legs at 3/4 time. They look okay at the moment. This man was always going to be the trump card. Beautiful kick. Split the middle. Bullseye. Straight through. He gets his 4th. 9 minutes into this, the last quarter. And Port Adelaide are starting to wheel away.
There's a couple of things that happened.
There's still 20 minutes of the 94 grand final left. It would be very premature to write off this classy outfit called the Eagles. Pedler around the body. Spear sits in front spot. Really needed to take it, Jason. It's given Hodges, who's got a head of steam up. A bit of a charge around the body. Beautifully taken by young Andy McLeod right on the line. He has 1 and a chance to make it 2.
And he's inducted into the Australian Football Talent Camp next week in Wantirna, the Kings Camp for 50 aspiring AFL footballers.
Yes, he has exhilarating pace. Just keep your head down, Andy. He's looking into what sunshine there is. I think he's having a quiet prayer.
I think so.
Into the sun. Little breeze from left to right. Port Adelaide fans rejoice. They go a little further ahead. They eke it out now to 19 points the difference.
And look at the work by Scotty Hodges. He flicks it out to himself, gathers it desperately on the left boot, creates something out of nothing.
They know they're a chance now.
Free kick down there. It was deliberate. Schwartz ran the ball out of play, and the umpire said it was deliberate and gave Port Adelaide a free kick.
Williams, Hodges, a chance. Mellicallis, he can get through. He's got a chance. Around his body. 6 goals for Magpies. Mellicallis first. I think they've got it.